Alrighty then, it's time for episode 33. With you as always is me, Chucky, from the forums, and here is Jigsaw.
Hope you all are doing well.
Yeah. So another lineup of 5 movies to discuss. What have we got for today's show?
Well, as always, another very interesting choice of movies. We first start out with an Australian slasher, Cut, from 2000. Following that, a interesting British movie, I Don't Want to Be Born, also known as Sharon's Baby, also known as The Devil Within Her. And it has sort of a cult movie in some ways. Then, Kickboxer 5, which is a long way coming. After that, we have a 1980s slasher, Visiting Hours, from 82. And we finish up with Seed of Chucky from 2004, which is, well, of course, the sequel to Bride of Chucky. And one of Chucky's favorite movies.
Yes, we shall see about that. Let's get things started with Cut from 2000. It's one of these movies that's about a group of film students who attempt to finish a horror movie that stopped production years earlier when the director was killed, and any time the film is brought back, the killer from the movie also comes back to stop it. So this is an Australian movie. I've seen it back kind of when it first hit cable. So I saw it back around 2000, 2001, somewhere around that time. And I remember feeling it was somewhat enjoyable. I mean, it wasn't a great movie, but it was entertaining. And so this is actually the first time I've rewatched it since then. And I had fairly similar thoughts. I thought it was still okay. I thought it was somewhat entertaining, but at the same time I don't think it ever got to the point where it would make my repeat playlist. So it's not the type of movie that I think I'll come back and watch again every few years or anything like that. But it was okay for what it was.
So I've seen this once before, let's say between 5 to 8 years ago. And I apparently gave it a 6 out of 10 back then. And I'm not sure why I gave it that rating, but it definitely doesn't deserve that. I don't get that frustrated out that afternoon watching movies, but this movie just annoyed the hell out of me. There's so many things in this movie that bother me. One of them, they never really explain why this movie is cursed. Is it simply because a guy just murdered somebody else during the making of the movie? It's not like the director was a witch or something. It never went into any detail about why the movie is cursed. More to the point, once we figure out that, and let me just spoil this for like 30 seconds. Once we figure out that the killer isn't anybody in the cast, it's literally just from the movie. I mean, it annoyed me and it didn't make any sense to me.
Isn't it the actor from when they first made the movie?
Is it like a parody of the actor for some reason?
Yeah, I mean, the guy, it looks like the guy who killed the director at the beginning of the movie.
If it was, they either should have made it more clear or should have made it make more sense. Not a small thing. There's a quote in this movie, they're having sort of like a meeting before they go make this. There's a quote by one of the characters that says they want to make this movie, let's see, bigger than Halloween, creepier than Friday the 13th, and more blood and guts than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That quote, that's single,
just marketing.
Yeah, that single quote pissed me off. One, bigger than Halloween. I mean, I'm not sure if Halloween was a particularly big movie in Australia, but, I think most people know it. Then, more blood and guts than Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The first Texas Chainsaw Massacre isn't a particularly blood and guts gory movie. Much of the violence is implied.
Well, see, then that's kind of a true statement, isn't it?
If you look at it that way. But I'm pretty sure that's not what they were going for. It came across at times like the movie was being made by horror fans. They talk about like maybe the positive aspects of horror movies. But this just bothered me. And again, I don't think it particularly made much sense. I do like the the concept, and I'm not sure if you're familiar. There's a movie from 2008 called Midnight Movie, which I actually thought was enjoyable. It's not great, but it's an enjoyable little slasher. It has a somewhat similar concept to this, but that one did like things so much better. This one, I guess, is like a horror comedy, but most of the comedy is, you could easily watch this movie and not notice the comedic aspects. This was not an enjoyable time.
When you were bringing up quotes, I thought you were going to mention that one girl who says something about Bride of Chucky 7.
Well, that actually annoyed me too. It might have been funny if it was like Bride of Chucky 2 or 3, but again, I forget which character said that, but it's most horror fans know there's just, one Bride of Chucky. And just small things like that, if that individual actually, Children of the Corn reference would have been funny because you could theoretically say, oh, there are 666. It just fell flat with me as much as this movie did.
Yeah, there are a few quotes or moments in the movie that I thought were kind of amusing, but nothing you'd go back to watch again just for those things. Like the moments where that one guy says to the girl, "Oh, I always found you very attractive," and she's just like, "Oh, fuck off." And I like the moment in the movie where the killer kind of waves by to the camera to the guy filming it just before he kills him. But yeah, there's not. I wouldn't say there's anything too memorable in the movie itself. Probably. Earlier in the film, and I think this is actually when they were originally making the movie within the movie, there's a scene where the guy attacks, I think it's Molly Ringwald's character, or, when she's acting in the movie, and he grabs her from behind, and she's immediately saying, "Oh, what do you want? Do you want sex? Do you want sex?" And well, if that was me, I would have been, "Oh, hell yeah, let's take these pants off." But yeah, the funny thing about Molly Ringwald in the movie is she's obviously the American star power, not just in the film, but also in the film within the film.
Yeah.
Which is kind of amusing, but I have this thing about her where I've seen her in a bunch of different movies, and in some movies I have literally no interest in her at all, and then in some other movies I think she's alright, she's like fairly decent, so I don't know what to think of her in this movie, but I guess it doesn't matter because the movie itself, like I said, it's just not memorable. It's to me it's watchable, it's okay, but it's not special.
Yeah, and actually, I just remembered another small gripe of mine. So one of the characters, and I won't say who, but one of the characters in the movie is the daughter of the original director who was killed back in the 80s. And this character has a line about, wants to prove that her mother's movie was more than just some quote-unquote hacky slasher. The one scene that we see from the original movie, we see it a few times in the screening section. It literally looks like a terribly generic, made-for-TV 90s thriller movie. It looks like a terrible movie. And also, the name of the movie is Hot-Blooded. That's... there's some bad slasher movie names from the 80s, but I've never seen a slasher with as bad as the name as Hot-Blooded. So I'm not quite sure what this individual is talking about, because based on everything we saw from that movie, it looks like it was probably a good thing it wasn't finished. Plus, the whole design, what was the quote-unquote antagonist's name? Skalman or something like that?
It was Stitch something, I can't remember.
I don't know. The design looked like a really terrible Freddy Krueger. It didn't have like anything going for it. The weapon choice was interesting, and I'll give the movie some credit, and this is where most of the points are coming from. I think a lot of the kills are decent. I think they're amazing, but I think they're okay. But most other aspects of the movie, more than anything else, just annoyed me.
I didn't really have too much issue with the mask in the movie. I think, for the most part it's fairly generic, but
I guess it's consistent.
Yeah, I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was a bad look for a killer. It just, once again, it's just not special.
I would say this is, in my opinion, at least movies I've seen, probably one of my least favorite post-stream slasher movies. And, of course, a lot of the big ones being like Urban Legends or I Know What You Did Last Summer, in that maybe 4 to 5 year range after Stream came out. This one it just felt somewhat generic and definitely pitiful in my opinion.
Okay.
and that comes from a big slasher fan.
Okay, well, just to sum up everything that I've been saying, I found this movie to be, watchable but not memorable. The killer in the movie's okay. I didn't really particularly like towards the end where they started adding the effects of his face going all weird as they kept trying to kill him. But it was alright. It's not going to make my regular playlist, but who knows, I might give it another watch in another 20 years. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, and you can fight me.
Well, to each their own. I thought the movie, I guess, like you said, to sum it up, I thought it was pretty horrible. The one good thing it has going for it, like I said, is the kills, and it's not like they're amazing, they're just decent. Did it care for any of the characters? Did it care for the occasional humor? The story I thought was really piss poor. And I didn't even talk about the ending, when after they defeat the evil, there's another training, and then he comes back. Oh my god. Yeah, I gave this one a 3.5 out of 10, rounded down to a 3. I legitimately did not have a good time with this. Which is a shame because, like I said, when I first saw this movie, I apparently thought it was okay-ish, but rewatching it did not live up to my beliefs. So, 3 out of 10.
The one thing about this movie is that it felt very Australian to me. Like, a lot of more recent Australian movies, unless you were told they're actually made in Australia, you might not immediately pick up on it, but this is a movie where, like, the accents and everything really come through to me as rather Australian, so I guess, well, if it was any more Australian, the movie could have been called Can't.
Some quality Australian humor. Speaking of Australia, we have Australia's fourth mother, Britain, representing this next movie. Some history. From the UK, we have I Don't Want to Be Born, which, like I said, has various other titles. I first actually saw this movie under the name Sharon's Baby, which is a somewhat perplexing title because there's no character in the movie named Sharon. It was apparently like in dubbed versions they named the main character Sharon for some reason. And also on Amazon Prime, at least in the USA, it's under the title The Devil Within Her. So it's interesting among the titles. And the movie itself is something. Basically, this one woman with a somewhat promiscuous past has a baby who is quite a bit bigger and quite a bit more aggressive than most average babies. And it doesn't take long before she thinks something's wrong with the baby. Maybe there's some type of curse upon the child, maybe he's even possessed by Satan. And throughout the movie, the baby seems to do things that are, well, things a baby probably should be doing. It's a lot of accidental deaths, and it just goes from there. In some ways, it almost feels like The Omen, only, to be clear, The Omen is so much better than this. But I did like, the various accidental deaths, and there were some actually okay kills occasionally. There was like a guy who was being hung. There was a decapitation. And if none of that works for you, there's at least Daniel Pleasance. So, hey, it has something. What did you think about this one?
Yeah, I've seen at least the Devil Within Her poster art floating around the internet the past couple of years, and I think that's because there was like a Blu-ray release in the past couple of years for it. But it's a movie that I'd never seen and thought whenever I get a chance it's something I'll give it a watch. But yeah, so I thought this movie was bad. It's bad. And, I mean, looking at it on IMDb, I think it's got, a 4 out of 10?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
I mean, it's worse than Cut. When a movie has a lot of titles, that's usually a sign that the movie sucks on a mass level. Because they go, well, we released it under this title, it didn't do well, let's release it under another title, to give it some new life. Let's see if a new title will bring in more people. That didn't work. Let's bring in another new title. I don't know how many titles this movie has, but it's at least 3 or 4. And that's just in English-speaking countries. So, yeah, I can kind of see why this movie has so many titles. In addition to that, it really doesn't help that for a movie that has multiple strip club scenes, there's no decent tits in this movie.
I mean, some of the women were sort of attractive-ish.
Look, Carolyn Munro is okay. I'll leave her aside. I've seen her in multiple movies, and depending on the movie, I may tap it. I may. She was in Faceless, now that I remember. And actually, she was one of the things that I commented in, I believe, when we were reviewing your favorite title. What was that movie? That one that's like an old-timey Saw type movie.
You're talking about The Abominable Dr. Phibes?
That's it. Yeah. That's the movie I was thinking of. And I did make a comment that I saw his wife in a picture or something in the movie, and I was like, yeah, she looks pretty good. And I believe that was Carolyn Munro. I may be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure it was. So she's okay, but and to be honest, I guess for the time, Joan Collins looks okay too, but whatever. The movie has a couple of decent names in it. Like you said, Donald Pleasance is in it, so Halloween fans may get something out of that. But there wasn't a whole lot else redeeming for me in it.
I mean, it does have Hilary Mason, so that's always fun.
Okay. I guess the other thing about this movie, even though, yes, it's a British movie, to me, it kind of felt, I don't know, it kind of had a bit of an Italian vibe to it for me. I don't know, did that come across to you?
Well, only because the husband was Italian. I mean, when he was with his sister and they're speaking Italian, it obviously came across. But I mean, honestly, most of the movie to me felt what I would expect, a British movie to feel like.
There's certain things that happen in the movie that are just kind of silly, or those shots where you're looking at the baby and then they flash between the baby and the more grown-up look. I mean, that was just so silly.
Yeah, speaking of which, I don't think they really explained properly the connection between the dwarf and the baby. We saw the dwarf character sort of give a curse on the woman, in a flashback. But aside from that, and the ending scene, it seems like the dwarf and the baby are somehow interconnected, but we never really get any reason why, which I thought was interesting / really sloppy writing.
There's a moment in the movie where they take the baby. I think it was to get baptized or in the church, and yeah, obviously the baby's freaking out from being in the church, and I'm just sitting there thinking, I mean, wow, he's in a church. Who he doesn't like being in the church? Then again, who does? I mean, unless you're really religious. So I don't know. There's nothing really in the movie that really felt like it was. I mean, I could laugh at it a little bit just because I thought it was silly and stupid, but it doesn't have enough of those moments either for it to be a movie that's so entertaining for being a bad movie.
That church scene actually is one of the scenes that sort of reminded me of The Omen, because there's a scene in The Omen, and I'm assuming you've seen it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
There's a scene where they try to take the baby to church and it just starts crying and screaming. But at least in that movie, it comes across as a bit more almost dramatic. And here it just seems so weak.
Yeah, I've seen The Omen a few times. Yeah, that's a decent movie. Definitely a much better movie than this.
I will say, I did, and this will surprise me, but there is a non-character in this movie, played by Elaine Atkins, who it's not a name I'm familiar with. But I sort of did like that character, and she had a few conversations with Donald Pleasence's character, and I'm not sure why. They sort of talk a little about mysticism versus science, and make little jabs at each other. I thought that was sort of interesting, and despite just being like maybe a 4 or 5 minute scene of just talking, that might be one of the few scenes in this movie that actually stood out to me.
The funny thing is, well, you just reminded me of something that's a weird coincidence. Both my grandparents, or both my grandmothers, have the exact same name, Eileen. Which, I don't know. It's just a weird thing.
One more thing that I think is worth noting, because you saw, a lot of the movie can come across as a bit silly at times, when it's going between the baby and the dwarf character, and just a few of the scenes, it's somewhat melodramatic at times even. But because it's made in the 70s, it's pretty much played straight. Like that really corny guy with the mustache, I forget his character's name, but he was such like a stereotypical sleazy guy. And actually, now that you mention, he sort of reminds me of Italian actors I've seen in the past. But the movie's played straight, which makes it all the more funny. And unfortunately, since the story wasn't written particularly well, it doesn't come across as effective. I will say I did like the conclusion, only because it has a somewhat 70s bleak feeling that you would come to expect. But overall, I think the movie is, I think we can both agree the movie's a bit below average.
There was a weak-ass Omen movie with a weak-ass Exorcist conclusion. That's what I thought.
Actually, now that you mention it, this is one of the oldest movies I've seen that has like a quote-unquote killer baby. I know there's a movie from the year before called It's Alive, which I've not seen, and I think that has a somewhat similar idea of a killer baby type thing. But I just hope they can do more with that than what this could do.
Yeah. Well, I've seen It's Alive a long time ago. I don't remember it being a great movie, but I definitely remember it being better than this movie.
I can imagine that's not a difficult thing to beat. So, yeah, a lot of this movie is not great. That's true. I will admit I had an okayish time with it. Now, I have seen this movie once before a long while back, and I didn't care much for it then. But there's sort of a charm to this movie that I have difficulty putting into words. Just the scenes of the guy walking around downtown London, which are just like filler scenes. But I don't know, it sort of has a charm to it. It's still not a good movie, but it had occasionally interesting kills, and again has some slightly younger Donald Pleasence, and I'm okay with that. I'm giving this a 6.5. I'm going to round that down to a 6 out of 10, which is still for me a below average rating, but I don't think it's as awful as many other people might believe.
That rating is too damn high. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10. Look, it's not completely unwatchable, but it's a bad movie. It's got a lot of corny, tacky scenes. Like I said, it's like a weak-ass Omen movie with a weak-ass Exorcist conclusion. I didn't really find anything in the movie that's drawing me back to it. Lackluster tits for a movie with multiple strip club scenes. That's probably the biggest crime this movie has. And I don't think I'll ever need to watch this again.
I do sort of appreciate how our ratings are somewhat like exact reverse between the first two movies. This should be an interesting show.
Let's move on to Kickboxer 5 from 1995. This one is it's about a disgraced South African kickboxing kingpin of sorts who decides to start his own kickboxing federation. and forces all the great fighters in the world to either join or he kills them. It's a plot that seems quite half-baked to me. It doesn't completely make sense. Like, in this movie, he brings all these fighters in, and, okay, he kills the ones that don't join, but if they do join, I know he can make money off them, but it seems like as the movie goes along, he just wants all their belts, but if he's not killing the ones who joins, is he really getting their belt? I don't know. It's just a movie with a plot that just seems kind of stupid to me. But in addition to that, obviously this is a sequel to the other Kickboxer movies, and you could easily make the argument that if you took out a few lines of dialogue at the beginning of the movie, there's nothing at all that ties this one to the previous 4 movies. So I don't know if they made this movie or began making this movie as a standalone movie that had nothing to do with the other 4 movies, and they just went, if we just add a few bits of dialogue that mentions a character from the previous movie, now we can call it a sequel and just market it that way and, you know, get more people to watch the movie. I'm guessing that's what happened, but who knows, I could be wrong. But either way, I thought, at least compared to the other 4 movies, this is the worst movie in the series.
Yeah, so this was obviously a pretty cheap movie, much like the 4th movie. But I actually enjoyed this movie a bit more than the 4th one, mainly because I feel like the fighting in this movie, and there's quite a bit of fighting, it, I guess, kept me a bit more engaged. And I sort of like the whole, like, you know, what's the guy's name? Matt Reeves, I think. Him teaming up with the other guy, you know, going on like a fighting rampage, trying to get to this, you know, big Federation boss. You know, it's you know, sort of like a cheap body fight movie. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was occasionally amusing. It's nothing, you know, spectacular, but for like a cheaply made martial arts movie, I don't know what more you could ask for, to be honest.
I went into it expecting it to be worse than it actually was, because I had seen this movie a long time ago, back in the 90s. I only watched it once, didn't like it, never returned to it. It's because it really has no ties to the other movies, outside of actually a couple bits of dialogue at the beginning, which, to be honest, is very disrespectful to me, in which they say, "Oh, David Sloan got killed, whatever."
I mean, is that pretty much what they did in the 2nd movie, though?
Not entirely, because they did film scenes with Van Damme's character in it, and at least they still left in one scene where they actually did show him getting killed, and I guess the saving grace there is that they still brought back Tong Po and other characters from that first movie. You know, they brought Xian back. There was a lot still to like in Kickboxer 2. If you enjoyed the first movie, I feel. I know some people mainly just missed Van Damme and they cut it off there, but that's just, it really pisses me off that they just kill off a character with a line of dialogue. Especially in this movie, because, to be honest, there's the bad guy in this movie, he's, look, he's not terrible, but he in comparison to someone like Tong Po or whatever, he just feels like nothing. But, like I was saying, I actually didn't dislike this as much as I thought I was going to when I rewatched this. I did mildly enjoy the relationship between the 2 main characters. You know, I did like the aspect of them teaming up, even though, you know, I wouldn't say the fights in the scenes in the movie are all that special to me. They might be a little more, I don't know, the previous movies felt like they were more geared towards actual kickboxing, the sport, whereas this is just more, hey, let's go around and do a bunch of fancy kicks and things like that. The one funny thing in the movie is just some of these characters are pretty ridiculous, like with the accents. I mean, they got one guy in here who, I don't know if you've watched Happy Gilmore, but it reminds me of Shooter McGavin, like a guy who eats pieces of shit for breakfast. It is just ridiculous. He had this ridiculous accent. In fact, I actually used that Shooter McGavin gif on you, I think it was yesterday, where I was doing the finger guns.
Yes.
But, there's other characters in the movie with just some ridiculous accents. There's this one German guy, I think it was German, it was kind of towards the end of the movie, just before the casino thing, where
he was
gets
one of the
into
most generic German guys I've ever seen, by the way.
Just listening to him, yeah, it's good. Let's fight on the lawn. It was just stupid.
I mean, it did have a pretty intense prison break, though.
That was okay. I mean, the moment where the guy goes up in flames, sure. But yeah, I think overall it's a fairly generic 90s action movie with not a whole lot of star power. Mark Dacascos, he was very young in this movie. He did eventually pop up in some more popular movies or bigger movies, and he's a decent martial artist. So, there's at least a little something to see here. I still think the big thing about the Kickboxer movies are the characters they had already established in those first few movies, and that's what kind of kept the series going. And this is the last movie, and obviously this is where the series ends, this is where it died. And I'm not surprised because, like I said, the characters in here, there's no ties to the first movie outside of saying, oh, David Sloan died. You can watch it, but you'll forget it.
I don't think I have anything more.
One last thing that I wanted to say. Towards the beginning of this movie, there's a scene where the blonde American guy, he's fighting with these thugs because he won't sign that contract. And maybe I missed something, maybe I wasn't paying great attention, but it seems that, and he dies, obviously, from what we see, but the last blow that he takes, like the last big blow that he takes, is just a backbreaker where someone just drops him on their knee. Now, I can understand if maybe he's crippled for life or anything like that. That move's not going to kill anyone. I mean, that's a move they do in wrestling all the time. It's not killing anyone. You could get hurt from it. I don't think it's going to kill you.
I do not know enough about anatomy to reply.
Yeah, well, I just thought that was a silly way to die.
I mean, it looked pretty painful to me. I mean, I could sort of see that causing enough damage.
Sure, it'd be painful. And like I said, you could get seriously hurt from it. I don't think you could. I mean, the chances of you dying from something like that is probably 0.001%. And I guess, being a movie, we don't expect 100% realism. We expect things that are unexpected. So I guess, it's a shitty 90s action movie. We'll give it a break, but still, it's just amusing to see someone die from a move like that. Anyways, I'll just sum it all up by saying this is a movie that I didn't hate as much as I thought I would hate it upon rewatching, but it's still the worst movie in the series. Even if they hadn't killed off David Sloan, I still would have felt it was the weakest movie. And to be honest, if it wasn't for the fact that they said, oh, David Sloan's been murdered, let's move on, I may have given this a 6 out of 10. But because of that, they did him so dirty, I can't forgive that. I'm going one below, I'm giving it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, so this one is just like a low-quality martial arts movie, which is pretty much the same as Kickboxers 2 through 4. And
hey!
I stand by that statement. I mean, I really like the first Kickboxer. I think I gave it like a 9 out of 10. But the second one was, at least in my opinion, it seemed like a pretty steep decline. And the series sort of like never got too much better than the second movie. And I know this movie, it wasn't great, but it's sort of like the type of movie you expect to see on like maybe TNT, like at 3 a.m., just a action movie that you can throw on, maybe have a little fun with. And I was entertained. I didn't particularly think any character was memorable, but I sort of enjoyed the interactions between the characters, and I don't know, I had an okay time with it. It's still a below average movie, but I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10.
Wow. You may be the biggest fan for this movie now.
It's interesting, I was just looking on the IMDb pages. This movie actually has the same rating as the fourth movie does. Both of them have like a 4 out of 10. So I thought that was mildly interesting. Apparently people don't see a big difference between the two.
See, that's the thing. I think because... See, this movie is made... It's made okay for, you know, a 90s direct-to-video action movie. It's kind of what you expect from that. It's not poorly made, it's just a very generic action movie. The other one, see, I believe a big reason why people give Kickboxer 4 a bad rating is because they brought back a character, someone completely different play that character, we're talking about Tong Po here, and a lot of people found it ridiculous because he looked like he was wearing a mask, and his character changed. They made him a lot weaker, so...
I mean, to me that seems like a legitimate reason to dislike the movie.
It is, but it's more based on a character than it is the actual quality of the movie itself. I still feel that people would prefer Kickboxer 4 over 5, but because of that one thing, what they did to a specific character, that dragged it down quite a lot.
I mean, I think Kickboxer 4 had more problems than that, but that was then and this is now.
Well, it's not the only problem, but that was probably the biggest thing that I see people complain about.
Next up we have, I wouldn't necessarily call this a classic movie, but from 1982, Visiting Hours, which is a slasher movie. Plot is almost interesting. This one outspoken woman, who big woman rights activist, gets attacked by a man and is sent to the hospital after a pretty vicious attack. But this guy's crazy and keeps trying to get into the hospital to finish her off. And throughout the movie, he also kills other women, and we get little flashback snippets about why he is the way he is. The movie itself isn't particularly unique. There's some mildly interesting story ideas here, but for most of the time, when the movie's not dragging, and it does drag a bit, it's like a competently made movie. It's just not a necessarily overly engaging movie, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, this was a first time watch for me. I always get this one... Well, in the past, I've always gotten this one confused with a couple of other type of medical or hospital-themed movies. So I believe it was this movie, X-Ray, and Cardiac Arrest. Or mainly based on the theme from the posters, because we all know after watching Cardiac Arrest... That was a very deceptive poster.
And I just read to butt in for just a second. And X-Ray is also known as Hospital Massacre, if anybody's more familiar with that name.
Yeah. So I've always kind of gotten those mixed up, at least before I had given any of them a watch. Just because, like I said, based on posters or the general plot, they all felt like they were somewhat, not exactly the same, but similar type themes. And so, yeah, I watched this one. There's some good, there's some bad, I'll just first move on to Michael Ironside, who I think is generally good or suitable to play like a slimy type of character like this. I think he has a very particular looking face that suits this type of role. So I think he did okay in this movie. But his character, we go through a big portion of the movie where he just doesn't talk. But then later on he does talk a little bit, which kind of reduces that silent presence that he had earlier in the film. And then there's also moments where I think they just showed him off too much or not enough. And I don't know, they just didn't really... I don't think they nailed the character I think he has a good look for the character. They just didn't know where to take this character. And so I kind of wanted more or less from him. He either needs to be one of those characters where you don't know enough about him that you want to know more, or you get everything you possibly can from him, and I didn't get either. Plus he wears, like, a leather wife beater, which...
It's quite fashionable.
It just... I mean... No. That's not a good fashion choice.
Well, the unfortunate thing is, I probably don't disagree with any of that, but I do think Michael Ironside, and he's not even an actor I particularly have seen in that many things. I might have seen him in like 2 other movies.
You're missing him in Total Recall.
Indeed, I've not seen Total Recall. I'm assuming that's a movie that I've not seen. So Michael Ironside isn't even an actor I'm not familiar with, but I do think he was easily the most, if not interesting, the most memorable character in this movie. Because the main actress is, I think she's decent, she's okay, but, it's not really a stand-up performance. And, you have, like, William Shatner, who appears every now and again, but he never amounts to anything. Like, he's literally one of the least important characters in the movie. At least some of the people who are portioning the gonies around are doing something useful. And I also liked the nurse character. I thought she was, a likable, poppy individual. But really Michael Ironside's performance is one of the only ones that really sticks out, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, I didn't mind the nurse character. I thought the main character, the older lady that he's been trying to kill throughout the movie, she didn't really do anything for me. In many ways, this movie is a little bit ahead of its time, because it is kind of like one of those female empowerment type movies, but she doesn't quite become the empowering female that I thought she would be in the movie. Like, she spends pretty much the entire movie, like, just freaked out that she's gonna get killed. So, I don't know. Shit happens.
And actually, on a related note, for a slasher movie, this was pretty, in my opinion, it's pretty weak, as far as kills go.
I think they had some decent scenes leading up to what could have been, like, if only the actual kill itself was more memorable or violent or whatever. The setup towards those scenes were pretty decent. Yeah, it just never quite got to the point where all that memorable things happen throughout this movie.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning, at least I noticed this. The movie is a bit long, it's like an hour and 45 minutes. And I think because of that, there are just certain parts of the movie which just felt like they're dragging a bit. Like, this is little, I guess you could call it a subplot, where the killer sort of hooks up with this one chick and then he abuses her and assaults her. And then she becomes a little important later on. But, and it leads somewhere, I guess, but it just didn't do much for me. It's the same with the killer becoming interested in going after the nurse. I mean, I guess there was a sort of creepy scene where he's in the house and, she's trying to protect her children, but again, it didn't do much to me. If they had, like, cut out a little, had shortened the movie a bit and had, just him in the hospital more, as opposed to, like, going on all these side quests, it would have been a bit more okay.
Yeah. The, towards the end, there's a scene where he pulls out all these pills and he starts removing his belt. And I couldn't help but think that, I don't know, this is just silly, but what those pills were. I was thinking, what, has he got some hardcore Cialis or something? He's taken off his belt, he's gonna have a good time. Shortly after, then we realize what he's doing, but... I like
how that's what you jump to.
Well, I mean... Come on, if someone pulls out a whole bunch of pills and starts taking off their belt, I mean, what am I supposed to think?
I mean, I will say, what he actually does is probably some of the most intelligence he's shown in the movie. It's not like a genius plan, but hey, it works. Plus, that's probably that scene where it shows his arm cut up a bit. That's probably one of the most violent scenes in the movie.
In fact, another small funny thing just when he does get taken to the or when he's in the hospital, and then the nurse looking at him says something like, if you need anything, just ask or beep the button or whatever. And as she's leaving, I notice he doesn't have a pillow. I'd be like, can I get a motherfucking pillow?
Yeah, that seems like a very makeshift room on a side note.
Yeah. I mean, could have been a little more comfortable for someone in hospital.
Yeah, I have to say, for having as many police as they did at the hospital, having only a single one guard the room might have been a mistake. But that's police for you. I like the idea of like hospital-based slashes, and there's not that many of them. Halloween 2 is probably the best one in my opinion. But you know, I enjoy Hospital Massacre. I think it's not a great movie, but I think it's okay. But this movie, I have seen it before, and I actually remember liking it quite a bit more than I do now. I still think it's okay. It's just not particularly good. I mean, it's watchable. I mean, it's still an 80s slasher. But you can sort of see why not many people talk about this one as opposed to, you know, The Burning or any number of memorable, even The Mutilator. I mean, you can just see why this one sort of gets thrown under the bus. So I had to think about this one a bit. I was considering at one point maybe as high as a 7 out of 10. But the more I think about it, the more it just... some parts just really dragged out, at least in my view. And it had some charm to it, but I was hoping it would be a bit more enjoyable than it ended up being. And there were some okay ideas, but overall, I think more often than not it was almost tedious. I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10.
Yeah. I'm also going with a 6. I mean, Michael Ironside is fine. I think he needed more or better writing for his character. Either show him a bit more, or show him a bit less. They kind of had that in between. It just didn't, it just didn't work for me. To be honest, towards the beginning of the movie, I actually felt like it was going to be a more enjoyable movie than it ended up being. Not to say that the scenes towards the end are the worst parts of the movie, because they're not. It's just, I think the interest in the character dwindled for the reasons that I mentioned before. Other than that, I thought the movie had some decent acting. For a movie in the early 80s, it seems to be presented fairly well for the type of movie that it is. It just doesn't end up being special. It didn't have any real memorable kills. I thought the main lady in the movie, she didn't add all that much. She's anti-violence, spends a whole movie kind of going, he's coming to get me.
I mean, she was right.
Well, yeah, but I felt the actual nurse character was more of a leading lady than this old lady was, so...
That might just be because you dislike feminists.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I just felt the movie could have been written a little bit better. It had some of the tools to make a good movie, it didn't get there.
And actually, just one more thing, because you reminded me, I actually think the beginning scene when she's going through the house and she's being attacked by the killer, and the ending scene where she's being chased, through the hospital, those are probably two of the best scenes in the movie, in my opinion, and everything else in between is where the problems come from.
We'll move on to Seed of Chucky from 2004. Chucky and Tiffany, they're resurrected by their gender-confused daughter or son, and hit Hollywood, where a movie depicting their murder spree from the previous movie is underway. Now, I know that you don't like this movie, and I think it is generally regarded as the weakest movie in the franchise to this point. For me, yes, it is probably the weakest movie in the franchise as well, but there's two things that still, to me, don't make it... Well, the main thing here is Chucky. he's in the movie. And like I've said for other franchises like Freddy Krueger, as long as that character is in the movie, it's watchable and still somewhat entertaining. And that obviously goes without saying for Chucky, because for those who don't know, Child's Play is my all-time favorite movie. So I am a big Chucky fan, and if Chucky's in the movie and it's Brad Dourif, what's not to like about that? However, we do know that this movie has the dumbest plot out of all the movies in the franchise. I mean, Don Mancini, he wrote every single Chucky movie, and this is his first time directing a Chucky movie. I think he does okay in terms of shooting the movie. I think actually the writing in the movie is the problem here. And for someone who wrote the first 4 movies, for him to come in and fuck up this one, at least the writing side of it, as bad as it has been, kind of ironic considering he's the thing we should have more concern about is the directing, because it's his first time directing, but no, it's the other way around. Anyways, before we get into more of this, what do you have to say on this movie?
Yeah, so I mean, Chucky basically hit it. My main problem with this one, and I think that a few problems with this movie, but it comes down to one thing. I hate this story. I despise it. I don't find it justifiable. Like, Bride of Chucky went a slightly more comedic direction, and I know that I used to like the movie more than I did when I last saw it. But this movie has almost nothing going for it, at least as far as I can see. The whole addition of Glan/Glanda has to be one of the most misguided choices I've ever seen in movie making. When the scene opens with like Glan/Glanda having a nightmare, and then he wakes up, or she wakes up with a British accent, like, that's about, let's say, 10 minutes into the movie, and as soon as that happened, I was pretty much done. And not much that happened past that point did much to change my mind. I mean, it was just embarrassing. And, Bride of Chucky had some okay things going for it, even if I thought it was a bit too silly. But this one is like 99% silly and maybe 1% almost okay. Even like some like the quote-unquote funny scenes, like these 2 characters talking on the phone, and then Tiffany's cutting into the conversation. The character's like, "Oh, why did you say it?" It's like, "Oh, I didn't say it," and they can't tell that it's a slightly different voice. It just, I didn't find almost any of it particularly amusing. But it's mainly the story. The story was not the direction I would have taken the series. And luckily, while this is the worst movie, I do think they get significantly better past this point. But watching this one, it's difficult for me.
The one thing about this movie that does... I don't want to say it has a special place for me, but this is the only Chucky movie I've managed to see in a theater. So I never got to see any of the previous movies in a theater, obviously because the first 3 came out when I was a little kid. But Bride of Chucky, I was still quite young in high school, so going to the theaters is not something I was really able to do at that time. So this is the one and only movie I've managed to actually see on the big screen. And the only way I actually got to see it was like it was a movie marathon type thing. They played like at least 3 or 4 movies. Seed of Chucky was the first one, but it started at midnight. So the 3 or 4 movies we watched went all the way through to like 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. So it wasn't the most ideal situation to go watch this movie, but hey, sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. So it does kind of have a little bit of a special place in my heart for that reason, but I can still definitely say that it is the worst movie in the franchise. Cult actually, I still have to watch Cult a little bit more, but Cult, the more I think about it, is probably getting close on that level. It's it's close.
Well, I'll say that Cult of Chucky, in my opinion, I think had a lot of problems, but it didn't have this many problems.
I think the thing that really caps it off for me is towards the end where Chucky and Glenn or Glenda are fighting, and the Glenn or Glenda character does this fucking Matrix flip or whatever the fuck that was. That was just, like I said, that just capped off how silly the movie is, and it was just so ridiculous that part kind of pisses me off.
That's pretty much how I feel, only for the whole movie.
But it still has Chucky in it. He's still enjoyable. Jennifer Tilly's tits are more than welcome in this movie. That's the highlights for me.
I mean, for me, there's pretty much only like maybe 2 highlights. There were 2 kills in the movie I sort of enjoyed. There's a flamethrower kill and also a disembowelment, I believe. And neither one was like special, but it was at least it was, you know, at least it was okay.
You didn't like the acid death for John Waters?
It was fine. I'll be honest, to this day, I have no idea why John Waters is important. I hear his name mentioned all the time, I don't know who the guy is. So, that didn't like have any type of special connection to me or anything. But the acid kill itself was okay. I just don't think it stood out as much as some of the other ones. But the unfortunate thing is that, aside from that, and maybe a character who I sort of liked mainly because I thought she was somewhat attractive, but she was also somewhat stupid, this movie had little going for it. When it comes to my taste in movies, when a movie gets this over-the-top silly, I check out. It was the same with our Triloquist that we discussed some episodes back, and The Greasy Strangler, which I hated with a passion. Like, both those movies were just way over the top, and Greasy Strangler had an interesting atmosphere to it. It didn't feel the same as this one, but it was still way over the top, and I just, when it comes to my movies, that's not really what I look for.
Return of the bullshit artist.
I'm here every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think Chucky's a pretty good character. It's a shame they made this movie that ruined everything about him. So I gave Cat a pretty low rating of 3 out of 10, and I just want to further add that I actually paid to watch that movie. I paid like $6 to see Cat. So I paid to watch Cat, and I still gave it, I think a fair, honest rating in my opinion. This movie, I disliked even more. It might sound like, oh my god, such a hater, but I give Seed of Chucky a 2 out of 10, which isn't too dissimilar from either The Greasy Strangler or Triloquist, which I think I gave both a 1. So, hey, the movie's just a bit better, guys.
Okay. So I'm going to... So this is one of those weird things for me where, obviously, I love the Chucky character, and like I said, that really helps to make the movie watchable for me. And even though I definitely acknowledge it's the worst movie in the series, and it's terribly written, but I can still watch it and not be bored or anything like that. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I did for a moment even consider an 8 just because...
Oh god, just because you hate me.
Well, just because I just find Chucky that entertaining that I can always watch him in anything. But don't worry, I'll give it a 7. I'm not going to go that high. I'll give it a 7, and we'll leave it at that.